Welcome back to our channel. Thank you for taking the time to watch my video. All the content I create is purely speculative and based on personal opinions. If you find the video interesting and helpful, please support me with a like and a comment. Bill had thought he understood every kind of betrayal because he made his living reading lies the way he read a contract, through lethal commas and carefully placed pauses. But this time, what kept him awake wasn't a deposition or a number. It was the sensation of someone touching his heart with a velvet-wrapped blade. The truth about Hayley didn't arrive like one immediate explosion. It came like a chain of faint crackles smoldering in the dark, each small sign snapping into place until the picture became undeniable, calls erased from the log, absences timed too perfectly, stories repeated with the same practice structure, and most of all the change in her eyes. No longer the look of a wife frightened by pressure, but the gaze of a predator measuring the distance between herself and her prize. When did Bill begin to suspect? He didn't want to admit it because admitting it meant he had lived beside someone who wanted him dead and still forced himself to believe it was love. But if he stepped back, the first fracture probably started the moment Lynette appeared, like a ghost from a past Hayley thought she'd buried, and it was Hayley's reaction that sent cold shock through Bill's spine. She wasn't merely anxious like someone afraid of being misunderstood. She panicked like someone watching a single loose thread pull an entire rug out from under her feet. Bill watched without speaking, because his instinct was always to let the person across from him slip on their own urgency. The quieter he became, the more he heard ragged breathing inside the silences, the more he saw clumsiness inside sentences that were supposed to sound harmless. A lawyer doesn't need evidence immediately to know he's being hunted. He only needs to recognize a pattern. And Hayley was repeating the pattern of people about to strip a life clean. Tenderness at the right moment, distance at the right moment, guilt planted at the right moment, and most tellingly, the way she began asking about insurance, as if it were ordinary family planning, while it carried the scent of a plan. Back then Bill didn't have enough pieces. He only had a bitter instinct, and he hated that instinct the way he hated a stain that couldn't be scrubbed off his honor. Because if it was right, he hadn't merely been deceived. He had deceived himself. Was there a third person who tipped him off? Yes, but in a way no one would want to take credit for. Lynette, even if she arrived under the name of a client, was a mirror reflecting the very past Hayley had tried to erase. Lynette didn't need to accuse Hayley outright. She only had to speak one old name at the right time, press on the right fear. And it was enough for Bill to realize his wife wasn't a woman living a new life. She was someone wearing a new life the way one wears a mask. And if Lynette was the mirror, Tomas became the lockpin. That made Bill start opening drawers he'd ignored. Tomas entered Lynette's matter as a professional challenge, but unintentionally became the hands that helped Bill touch a deeper layer of truth. Files, data, timestamps, connections. Bill never told Tomas he was using him as a verification line because Bill still had enough pride to call it caution, not fear. But the more he dug, the more he found signs of something crueler than greed. There were times Hayley met with Randy that lined up with changes in paperwork, insurance clauses, accidental updates about property, and a blurred chain of moves that only someone preparing for a major event would care about. Bill hated it most when the story started to fit together, because every piece clicking into place meant his love had been nothing more than a line item in her plan. He didn't collapse like a weak man. He collapsed in a more dangerous way. He became lucid to the point of ice, and that lucidity made him ruthless. When he was sure Hayley wasn't just cheating but aiming at his life to seize his insurance and assets, Bill refused to react like a wounded husband. He reacted like a man with power who understood that if he didn't strike first, he would die in an accident already written. He called Nina, not for comfort, but to lay the foundation for war. Nina knew Bill well enough to understand. He only called when he had decided. The way Bill looked at her made Nina realize this was no longer a marriage problem. This was a purge. Bill dropped 4 words on Nina, 4 words that made the air feel drained of oxygen, as if he had just signed a sentence without needing a courtroom. Make her disappear. Now. Not disappear from the house. Not disappear from a crowd. Disappear from every possibility of threatening him. Nina had seen Bill ruthless in business, but this was a ruthlessness born from being forced to survive. She understood those 4 words could open 2 paths. One legal and one filthy. And Bill stood exactly between them, as if he wanted both at once, an official verdict in a file, and pain repaid in blood. Bill's inner conflict wasn't whether he should save himself. It was what kind of victory he could live with without losing the last thing that allowed him to see himself as a man with principles. He asked himself whether sending Hayley to prison would be enough, or whether that would be a cheap kind of justice when she had planned to kill him. He asked himself whether, if convicted, she would reinvent herself as the victim, cry for the cameras, drag stains onto his name. And Bill hated the idea of being branded the man who couldn't keep his wife, even more than he hated the loss of money. Yet the thought of taking revenge with his own hands made him feel himself sliding into the darkest part of who he could become, where power was no longer law but violence. That disgusted him, and it fueled his rage. Because Hayley wasn't only trying to steal from him. She was trying to pull him into the mud so he could never lift his head again. Bill began playing the kind of game only he could truly understand. He built a silent cage around Hayley, letting her believe she was still in control, while every route she tried was blocked by details too small to argue with. He had her meetings followed, so each one became evidence. He ordered a full review of insurance clauses, so any change became a fingerprint. He let Nina approach the people Hayley believed were loyal because Bill understood that. In any conspiracy, the easiest thing to break is loyalty purchased by promises. But the key was Randy. Randy wasn't merely an assistant. In Bill's eyes, Randy was the bridge between planning and execution, the man who could save Hayley or be dragged down with her. Bill started breaking Randy in the most ruthless way, not by attacking head-on, but by creating the feeling that every choice Randy made was a trap. A call, a message, a secret meeting. Each could become a noose. Bill let Randy know he had seen enough to conclude the truth, but he still left a narrow crack of space. A chance to survive if Randy proved where his loyalty lay. In that moment, Randy realized he was facing a question of life and death. Save Hayley or save himself. If he saved Hayley, Bill would send him to prison or crush him another way. If he abandoned Hayley, he might live, but he would carry the stain of betraying a betrayer. Randy hated Bill for power that worked like this, but he feared him too. Bill didn't need to hit anyone. A phone call could reduce a life to rubble. Randy began to consider using Hayley's danger as a shield, because if she were cornered, she could drag him down with secrets only the two of them shared. And that was what made Randy shake. Hayley didn't love anyone. She only loved winning. In this battle, Randy might be nothing but a sacrifice. Bill saw that fear and exploited it. He demanded something from Randy, not to find the truth. Bill already had the truth, but to turn Randy into a tool. Bill wanted Randy to hand over what Hayley believed was untouchable, one piece of evidence that would collapse every denial she could attempt. But Bill pushed further. He wanted Randy to do something even darker, keep playing Hayley's ally, and lead her one step deeper, so she would expose the full plan through her own actions. Bill wanted Hayley to believe Randy still stood with her, so she would grow reckless enough to make a mistake she couldn't repair. For Bill, the greatest humiliation for Hayley was in prison. It was stripping her mask off at the exact moment she thought she had won. Yet the question haunting Nina, and Randy as well, was whether Bill was playing so big that he wanted Randy to kill Hayley. Bill never said it plainly, but he created an atmosphere where the idea could bloom inside someone else's mind. As a convenient solution. He spoke of how people like Hayley always find a way out, always find an escape route, always find someone to bribe, and how sometimes the surest way to end a threat is to make sure it no longer breathes. Bill didn't need to order it. He only needed to plant it. And once a seed like that is planted in someone like Randy, someone already walking in the gray, it can take root. Randy wrestled with it, because if he crossed that irreversible line, he would belong to Bill forever. Bill understood. He was building a prison without bars, where Randy would lock himself inside with guilt in exchange for survival. Meanwhile, Hayley could feel the net tightening, but she didn't know where it began, and that uncertainty drove her toward madness. She was furious because Bill was no longer predictable, because he wasn't reacting like a betrayed husband should. Bill was too calm, too polite, too busy. And that coldness told Hayley that if there was a war, Bill had started it long ago, and she was the one arriving late. Hayley threw herself into controlling the narrative again. She tried to manufacture a new event, a shock big enough to knock Bill off balance, because someone like her only wins when the other person loses control. But Bill didn't lose control. He simply narrowed her options. The more she was cornered, the more her true nature surfaced. Volatile, extreme, willing to threaten anyone who blocked her, including Randy. And when Hayley began to suspect Randy, the game entered its most ruthless stage, because now both co-conspirators started calculating how to betray each other in order to survive. Bill watched it like watching two knives stab into one another. He was no longer the hunted man. He became the one guiding the hunt. And yet, even with power in his hands, Bill was still tortured by a question that made him angry at himself. Why had he ever loved Hayley, and had he been the one who made it possible for someone like her to enter his life at all? That fury turned into the need to punish to the right degree. And to the right degree, for Bill, wasn't only a prison sentence. To the right degree was making Hayley lose everything she believed she could take: her new identity, her social image, her confidence, and the sensation of control. Bill wanted her to live long enough to see herself lose, yet he also wanted her to vanish, so he wouldn't have to look at that stain ever again. Nina understood Bill was standing at a crossroads, justice or revenge, and he was trying to fuse them into one. Randy understood he was being forced to choose, become a witness or become the executioner. Hayley understood the walls were closing in, but she still refused to accept defeat, because people like her only believe in one ending: either she wins or she drags everyone down with her. That was when the smell of real blood finally began to appear in the air of this. Because when people are pushed against a wall, they stop thinking about right or wrong. They only think about the exit. Bill knew that, so he didn't rush to deliver a final blow. He waited. He let Hayley take one more wrong step, let Randy reveal his true nature, let Nina decide which side she stood on. And in that silence, without a single spoken line, a conclusion remained unwritten but already terrifying. Either Hayley would be sent to prison in a clean, official victory, or Bill would slip out of the law to take revenge with his own hands, or Randy would be driven into a brutal test of loyalty, a mission that forced him to choose between killing Hayley and watching Bill kill his life instead. Bill no longer asked whether Hayley had betrayed him, because he already knew. What Bill asked now was whether he would turn that betrayal into a sentence, or into a curse, and who would have to pay the price so the truth could be buried in the way Bill wanted.